Hi, everyone. Welcome to this month's episode of Dr. G's Think Tank on Resilience. I am really excited about this conversation because I am a person who has always believed the mantra, knowledge is power. I like to know things. I tell my kids that details are my love language. I tell my team, I never mind you telling me more instead of telling me less or saying, oh, maybe she doesn't want to know that. If any of that rings for you, you may also find yourself with a lot of information at your fingertips. And then the question is, what do we do with it? Let me introduce you to the people that we have joining us today. And I want to start with Einat Naveh. Einat is a product and business leader with 15 years of experience at the crossroads of finance, media, and enterprise technology. She lived through the 2008 financial crisis from inside the industry, an experience that shaped how she thinks about risk, change, and what it takes to build things that last. She currently leads product and strategy at BERT Intelligence, which is a New York-based data analytics company, where she has driven significant growth and brought AI native capabilities to market. If you're thinking, I don't know what that means, don't worry. She's also a mother of two. She's based in New Jersey, and we may talk about all the data overwhelming parents these days as well. She thrives on the creative tension between suburban roots and the energy of New York City. Einat and I met at an industry conference centered on finding value and action in data. Einat, hello, thank you for joining.
Hi, thank you.
I want to start off by asking you, where do you see leaders feeling overwhelmed by data recently?
When my current CEO joined Burp, he asked me, what problem do we actually solve? And it was very easy to just say, I say that we solve data overwhelm, but we're aspiring to solve data complexity. And now with AI and the recent technology, we're able to actually make progress in that way. But they're two different things. And the teams that I work with on day to day, the ad operations people, publishers, they're drowning in campaign data. And I think any industry where you have a large amount of transactional data or so many rows and rows, it can feel overwhelming. And they can have so many reports and dashboards. I'm a dashboard queen, but they don't know what to do next. And so even when we built an alerting tool, which we rolled out years ago, it's a rule-based alerts. I had this number one thing that I said, I don't want to deliver fun facts. No one cares if it's just like something interesting. If you can't do something with what's coming into your inbox or into your Slack, however we're delivering it to you, then what's the point, right? It needs to be actionable. And I don't want to just send more noise. And so people can feel overwhelmed by just this volume of information. So now you're trying to get all your lots of rows into something, and then you're trying to give yourself alerts, but do you even need to action on all those alerts? So to me, the overwhelm problem is not even just too much data, but there's very little signal on what you need to actually action on. And that takes some prior thought and really working through what you're trying to do.
Okay, so the answers I'm hearing you give so far are volume, what makes leaders feel overwhelmed, volume, and knowing what matters.
Knowing what matters.
Okay, terrific. Let me now please introduce Scott DePetris. Scott is a recognized fintech industry visionary with over 25 years of extensive executive leadership. He currently focuses on early stage investing in the technology sector, which I take to mean, Scott, you spot really useful, interesting ideas and shepherd them along, but you'll tell me in a minute if I'm wrong. As well as he serves on several boards where he often acts as an advisor. Most recently, he was the founder of Encore Compliance. He currently serves on several private company boards and was a founding member, president, and COO of Portware, which was a leading developer of trading software. So now we're talking about data that directly makes people money, which is in the corporate world, I think a lot of the data we're talking about is how will this data make us money or keep us from losing money? He's the former president and board member of Drawbridge, which is a cybersecurity focused technology company. And I want to talk about the idea that data makes us safer, Scott, in all kinds of ways, or at least the belief that it does, and maybe question that a little bit. And senior vice president of Exchange Lab Inc., an intellectual property development company. Additionally, he sits on a number of nonprofit boards and advisory boards, which interest me and my audience a great deal as well. I met Scott just a couple of weeks ago and knew immediately that he would add a vital voice to our conversation. Scott, hi, it's great to see you again.
It is great to see you outside of the Caribbean.
So where do you see leaders feeling overwhelmed by data?
So the context for my answer on this one is that I am a believer through sort of the CEO lens and working with other CEOs that all productivity problems, so challenges within companies, are rooted in confusion. And it's not that leaders have too much data, it's that leaders don't have enough clarity. And so the biggest constraint on company performance, again, through that lens, in my experience, isn't capital, it's not market position, it's not even your product. It's the clarity of the people leading it and their ability to communicate that vision, that strategy, a new set of priorities through data to their employees or their stakeholders or to the market at large. And so it's not a data problem per se, it's really a clarity problem that data can help solve. Because if you don't know sort of precisely what decision you're trying to make and why, and you don't know which data would actually change your mind, then more data just sort of produces a bunch of noise, right? And so when I look at organizations that win, they aren't the ones with the most data. They're the ones whose leaders are clear enough to know exactly which questions matter way before they open that dashboard right on Monday morning. And when you have that level of clarity, it acts as a beautiful filter. It dictates exactly what data you want to collect and which decisions that data will serve. So ultimately, you don't beat the data overwhelm, if you will. By managing the data, you beat it by like mastering your focus.
Okay, so I'm hearing a through line now from figuring out, we do have a volume of data, an increasing and maybe ever increasing volume of data, and lots of people who are willing to give us data about the data, right? Running AI reports to figure out what are our AI reports saying about all of our data. But so this through line from the volume to what to do is fed through, and I not put it as what matters. And what I'm hearing you say is maybe the right filter to get that clarity is what questions are worth asking, or what questions are you actually asking?
Yeah, what's going to move the needle? And I'd say the clarity gap, like that's not just getting wider, right? Or more volume, it's becoming faster, which is even more confusing.
So it is not only about volume, it's about speed. And now
About
I feel
speed.
like we're in a physics lesson somewhere. Okay. So I think all of this is going to be really interesting to our last guest, who's going to be able to give us a different lens. Justin Evans is a patent holding 20-year veteran of the data and technology industry, whose innovations have generated hundreds of millions in revenue for Fortune 500 companies like Samsung, Comcast, and for those of us who are old enough to remember this as a household name, the Nielsen Company, as well as venture-backed startups. He's a recognized super boss, having established and led teams of 100 plus people in product, data science, and research. In addition to his innovation work, he's a thought leader, launching insights programs on a global level, from the Streaming Index and the Rule of 40 at Samsung Ads to the new TV at Comcast. His mission as a writer and communicator is to demystify data and AI, and to empower any leader to discover their data superpowers. He's a frequent conference speaker and the author of the Data Story Substack, as well as, and I have to admit, this is really why I wanted to talk to him today, The Little Book of Data: Understanding the Powerful Analytics That Fuel AI, Make or Break Careers, and Just Might End Up Saving the World. Justin is a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Columbia University and was a Dean Scholar at NYU Stern. Justin, hi, it's really nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. And gosh, it's interesting to hear the whole bio read back. Did I
I
really
bet it is.
Yeah.
All right, Justin, you work with a lot of leaders and all you do is talk about data. Where do you see leaders being overwhelmed by data?
Well, obviously, what's happening right now is that everyone's being overwhelmed by AI and the incredibly complex technology and data and math that underpins it. But I actually think we had sort of a hangover already, or debt, you could call it, in understanding how to use data as an asset, even before the AI revolution came. The big data revolution happened in 2015 when everyone realized that massive amounts of data could be put to work to solve complex questions in a really sophisticated way. But what I found is I would go to clients' offices, and I remember the one that really sticks with me is going to the office of a major airline. And I said, my gosh, you have so much data that you could really put to work to communicate with your customers and improve your business. And the guy said, data. I think the guy down the hall in the loyalty group has the data. And it was a Fortune 500 company, and it was just a few years ago. So I think we were actually quite behind on understanding how data is an asset that can be put to work for business purposes and for growth.
Okay. So, and it's very nice of you to say we. I imagine when that conversation happened, you thought, oh no, you people, you need help.
In a good
And
way,
right. Well,
an
good. Yes. Like
opportunity.
that's why you're there. I very much believe that information can be useful. And I am all about asking the correct question. I was mentioning to my guests before we started that in medicine, we're taught from medical school, you don't do a test unless you're going to do something with the results. And so, and this leads to all kinds of interesting ethical conversations, but it's also very practical. As a family doctor, often I'll have patients come in, and if I'm drawing blood work, they'll say, oh, I want to know my blood type. And I'll say, fantastic. I hope you go and give blood because the blood bank will tell you your blood type. But I can't just order a blood test to find something out because it would be cool to know it. I have to have something we would do based on it. It has to be actionable. And that certainly sometimes frustrates people, but it gives me this clear litmus test to pass through questions that I have, meaning, ooh, I'd like to know that. And I think that this comes up, and I want you guys to just understand my bias. I'm also really interested in the amount of data that we can get from wearables, and meaning health tracking devices. And I'm trying not to use any brand names, but because also there are dozens now available. And I have patients who will come in with reams of data, either on their phone or occasionally printed out on actual dead trees, to show me what their surface skin temperature has been every 5 minutes over the course of the last 3 months, along with their lung volume, which is what it tells them they're tracking, but it's also not really what it's measuring. I mean, there's all kinds of problems with this, not to mention patients who come in and say, I want a full body PET scan. And I understand why, because we feel like the more I know, the safer I will be, the earlier I could catch something, the longer I will live. And there are a bunch of different purposes to data, meaning I mentioned we might try and use it to make more money or to avoid losing money. We might use it to keep people safer. And Scott, I hope you'll speak to that about the cybersecurity stuff, but certainly as parents, we were given the strong impression that we ought to be tracking our kids academically, socially, geographically. And I have some data that backs up not doing that, but we're told it will keep them safer. And we have this idea that it will keep them safer and that we should be doing this to live longer. I'm really interested in this central question, and I hope it'll go a bunch of places, but you were warned, so I feel free just asking it. Justin, how could we be using data to make us more resilient?
I look at this from the lens of a business or nonprofit leader who is trying to harness data to fulfill their mission. And a lot of times you'll have, in fact, most of the time, a leader is great at what they do. That's how they got there. And they're an expert in their field. And there's no reason why they would also be an expert in data. And what they generally first need to grapple, just as jumping over a mental hurdle, is how data can express that vision. I have a nonprofit client who is doing work with urban agriculture, and they wanted to see what is the impact of what we do. It's so ineffable. It's there's a community element, there's a climate element. How do I articulate and quantify the impact that we're having on the world for them to understand? And this leader did understand it, which is why we're working together. It's very successful. Is that they can take something soft and something hard to put your finger on, and they can quantify it in numbers and use that to prove their vision to others, to communicate the impact of what they're doing to others. And that can be a very powerful hurdle to overcome as a business leader, that data is really your friend, especially if you're able to simplify it as a way of expressing your mission.
So in this case, the clarity was we'd like some data. We feel we know we're doing good in the world. we want to ask the right question to get data to demonstrate that good. Is that correct?
That's right. And it doesn't it doesn't have to be about good if we're
But in
talking.
that particular example,
Yeah, that's right.
what did he want to do with the data? Would he use it to thank people for their donations or raise more money or make the people who are volunteering want to volunteer more? Like, what was the goal?
The goal was to take the activity, the actions of a nonprofit and identify what the impact of that was. So how are we impacting the community in a positive way? How are we impacting food production in a positive way? All of which is really more or less how are we impacting the climate in a positive way? All of which are very complex and in some ways hard to quantify. And what we found over the course of the project is they had plenty of data to prove these points if we knew what question to ask. And once done, that could be articulated to, say, funders and other stakeholders to say, listen, I can now prove the impact of what I'm doing. And therefore, that should give you comfort that you should fund my organization.
Help us impact
support
more.
it from a policy perspective.
So, Scott, when you are supporting new startups, when you're advising, do you feel like somebody's got a really good idea, you want to help them carry it forward? How do you talk to them about clarity and help them, like, how do you frame it up for them in terms of making them think about data in ways that are going to make them and their organization more resilient?
It's about when times are calm and that idea is fresh, identifying the things that can move the needle, right? Either positively or negatively, right? And that's going to help you sort of create your data pathway, I guess, right? You know, which data should I be collecting so that we can figure out, was this a good decision or a bad decision? We can do it quickly and we can do it with clarity. And then explain it to the broader employee base or stakeholders about why something went right or why it went wrong, and then use that to make the next decision, right? That's how I think about getting to resilience through data. And so you're stress testing before stress actually happens. And so that's number one. Number two is as these businesses grow, I think, and Justin, I'd be interested in your thoughts, is AI does a very good job at helping us with institutional memory. It is the thing that sort of up until now has lived in humans, right? That hard-won knowledge, it's lived in people's heads. So in portfolio management land, just talk about that for a second, you had a thesis, an investment thesis, you executed on it, it either made money or lost money. And that memory was gone when that portfolio manager left. So how can we capture the institutional memory using AI and looking at unstructured data? And AI is so good at that. To actually preserve that institutional memory as an asset of the company, not just an asset of the employee. I do think is a really interesting topic to look through. It probably exists in all types of companies. I see it more through the portfolio manager lens, but
You gave me an invitation. I'll jump on that. I love your point of view on that because that AI is an enabler of kind of codifying institutional memory. Because I often look at the risk from the other side that if we've taken all of our well, let's think about a single workflow. We've taken the expert who knows about the workflow, and then we've taken their brain and we've briefed them, interviewed them, charted out everything they possibly have to say, put that into code and into a workflow, into a string of AI-based decisions. Now we're in a position where we can fire 80% of the people who also had that job. And so what I worry about, and I also worry about this in terms of just kids growing up now, because you can scale your writing so much now or your research now through AI. What happens when people come up when they don't develop the hard skills themselves that they can then put into the machines and train the machines? In other words, if we're kind of in effect killing or winnowing our experts in order to put them into bots, what happens? Are we still growing the next generations of experts and expertise?
I'm an optimist on that front. I think, especially America, is incredibly innovative and somehow jobs come up. I use radiologists as a really good example that I recently read about. We all thought AI would decrease the number of radiologists we need. Dr. G, to your point, more and more people want the data. They want their baseline MRI when there is no stress, right? And collect more data about my health. All of a sudden, we're hiring way more radiologists than we did 5 years ago because things became more accessible. And so I generally am on the side of optimism around it. I worry about the entry level jobs, Justin. I think, we all do. I also think that companies that are decreasing the number of entry level jobs will pay for it in the future, my personal opinion, but we'll see who's right on it.
And I do think, and I'm going to come to you in a second because I'd really like to know how you think about this idea, the overall question of resilience, but this idea in particular when you're designing product and helping people use the products that you guys have. But here's the thing that I hear a through line that in a small business, if you have someone in HR or in customer development or in a nonprofit in donor development, what happens when they leave? They don't know that if you're going to sit down with this particular donor, they do better if there's a few other people they know at the meeting, or this person prefers tea or prefers to meet at home. Just when I think of institutional knowledge, Scott, I tend to think of things we don't automatically have dashboards for, things that would go in additional notes, right? Underneath that person in the CRM. And so if I take on that role and you've trained our CRM to know some of those things and feed that to me, it makes me better, not only because I know that if I'm pitching Scott to donate to my organization, he really prefers if we do it while we're watching a game at a sports bar. But it also makes me think for the next person I'm developing, the next donor, boy, I wonder where they'd prefer to have this meeting. It doesn't always have to be coffee at the Starbucks on the corner. And so it opens my mind to more possibilities, the way a really good trainer, that if the person who was in development before me, if they had stayed to train me and they'd been a great trainer, and not everyone's a great teacher and trainer, even if they're great at their job. If they'd been amazing, they'd have said, hey, now listen, Deb, the next time when you go to meet somebody, think about these things. And so I do think there's a real opportunity to combine data with human capital, the ability that humans have, this optimism that Scott is speaking about, I have as well. And I think in that way, it's another maybe soft way we can use to make data make us more successful and resilient is by thinking, what questions should I be asking? I think we're going to come back over and over again to questions. Inat, can you jump in and talk for a minute about how you get people to think about the data that's available to them instead of my 5-year-old decided he wanted to collect rocks because he had an uncle who collected geodes. My 5-year-old spent 2 weeks collecting every rock he ever saw. So, and I think of data in some ways like that. There are geodes, there are beautiful, useful, vibrant pieces of data, and they're also way more just plain rocks in the world. How do you get people to think about that?
About something useful versus maybe not so useful?
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, it all kind of circles back to the very first question too, is what is the problem? And also not all of this needs to be quantitative. Right now, what you were talking about with where does the donor want to meet, that's a qualitative thing. That's a soft thing. And so I, as a product leader, need to also know the qualitative thing. So when I go into meetings with customers, it's not just looking at their usage metrics and what are they doing or asking them, what feature do you want? It's really like, what is the core problem the user is trying to solve? What are they actually trying to do? They may not know. They may tell you they want something specifically. And when you really press them with more questions, but why? Or show me what you would do next. Or who are you reporting this to? What do they need to do with that information? Like, you just need to keep asking. You probably need to ask at least 10 more questions. Then you can get to the heart of it. But the digging is a bit of a craft and an art in and of itself. Speaking of the talent bench, I'm currently developing someone on my team. And this is not so easy, actually, this part of getting to the problem we're trying to solve. So the way we tell our engineers what to work on next is we create these cards and we start with the problem. And actually defining what that is really challenging and requires a lot more effort, a lot more thought, thinking through it all, and speaking with customers, the qualitative stuff. So I don't know how that ties back to rocks, to be
That's
honest.
really useful. So all of the different questions that help you define the problem or the question you want to ask. Because when we're gathering data, I think, Justin, I think all data starts with a question. Yeah, is that a fair huge generalization?
I
Or
think
should?
I think that's the right answer. It's efficient to start with the problem you're trying to solve.
I
And
love that you said that because as someone who's worked in reporting and data, lots of times I'll get like, tell me the story behind this. I'm like, well, what is your question? I can much easier answer a question for you than just randomly dig through that. Now say I maybe I could dig a little better. But before then, I'm like, how do you want me to pull this data just to answer what's the story? What are we trying to say? Because trust me, and Justin, you probably can too. I could tell you any story you want me to tell you with the data.
it's really about like where's your I use a framework called the 7 Ds, and I won't go through all of them, but it's where's your demand coming from and what's that person's dilemma? And only from there do you decide what the data is, another D, that you need to create. And I have a cute, I think, maxim that all data businesses start with somebody doing something really boring. So the cultivation of the data is the boring part. It's unstructured. Scott mentioned that. You clean it, then you turn that into a database, but then the database has to be turned into an answer, and that's the crucial part. And so if you know where you're going with the answer at the end of the chain, then the rest becomes much more elegant.
And that's some of that clarity that you were talking about, Scott. So Peter said, and Peter, this didn't strike me as much of a question, but it's going to lead into a question that Bruce asked. He said, I hope the panel will talk about how to assure context to the massive data. Is data without context good data or not? And it seems pretty clear that we're saying no. But Bruce said something really interesting. More availability of data creates data usage amongst average people. By average people, I'm taking it to mean people who were not before this all that involved in looking at mass quantities of data, which then motivates people to ask questions that wouldn't otherwise be asked. He's saying he feels like there's a data loop that leads to data overload. Like if I found that out, I need to find out more. I certainly see that with health trackers. I certainly see people who say, I'm measuring the pH of my saliva, so now I need to know these other things about my saliva. And I have to try and like reach down into the rabbit hole and pull them back up from the composition of saliva. And so the question that I have, and Scott, I wondered if you'd answer it for me from your perspective in finance and also maybe in security in terms of safety. How do we keep ourselves from chasing data for data's sake?
I'll go to perhaps the cyber side in a second, but if I could draw on your health tracker, because I think it's a very real example that applies broadly, is when does data without context help? I might argue that all of the data that is being collected through trackers doesn't necessarily have full context because there's a large unknown in the medical community around what markers mean what and what you ought to do about those markers when they show up, or what a change in one of those markers might mean for a chronic illness, any of those things. So to me, that's a great example of where not having I mean, there's context, but there's not like full knowledge of what one might do, but collecting it through baseline and more broadly human trials, basically, like maybe the largest data collection across humans for medical purposes ever, actually matters and can drive real change. So I wanted to draw on that, Dr. J. I don't know if that makes sense for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we were talking a little bit about health trackers, and I did a case study on the company called Whoop, which has one of the bands that you wear, and they boil everything down to just a handful of metrics, and they have a sleep score, a resilience score, and they look for the biometrics that add up to that score that turns around and tells you whether today should be a hard workout day or a rest day. And I think it's a great example of saying, and the founder actually started the company because he had an experience in college when he was a college athlete, and he would find that he would have burnout periods and he would plateau. So that was his problem statement that he worked backward from and said, we have to come up with a resilience or recovery score and find the data that tells me that score. So I think what that tells us about the structure of all this is that he had an experience that gave him insight into the key question, and then efficiently captured the data that only and crystallized that question into a metric, and then only captured the data that created that metric. And that's a sort of the elegance behind the success of that company, Whoop.
Okay. So Scott, what do you think?
So I was going to pivot to corporate side because I do see a number of questions, I think, around how do you not go down the data rabbit hole, right, on some of this. So if I might, which is if to Einat's kind of question is, do you know what you're searching for, right? And so imagine you got a call from accounting, revenue is down 8% in the Northeast, right? Okay. I know that I need a lot of data to go figure out exactly what is going on right across all of those sales. So more data is probably better, and chasing the data rabbit hole is probably meaningful. Whereas I'm asking the question as CEO, are we losing revenue in geography X because our pricing is higher? Now I have a very specific question I'm trying to answer, and I don't need all of the data in the world. It's probably not going to be helpful, and I have a finite set of data for which I should be, going after and looking at it. And so that's how I like it's super simple, but I think easy way to explain where you might want to chase or down the rabbit hole, and where you have a finite, the question, what you need to answer it, and so more data is just going to be confusing, not get you to clarity.
And the thing that this makes me wonder, because when you talk about health data, I love the idea of knowing vast quantities of data about populations. My real concern is how it impacts the individuals.
Yeah.
So if you see markers that, boy, once we have thousands and thousands of them and can use the tools that are now at our disposal that were not 50 years ago or even 20 years ago, we may learn some very cool things that we can then go test and see if we were right. But in the meantime, if that means, Justin, that because of the wearable you have, now you're not sleeping as well because you're worried about what does it mean for you that your SpO2 is a little low and has been for a little while, and your dad had that problem with his lungs. By the way, everybody, I know nothing about Justin's health or his family. I'm making this up as we go. But now you're not sleeping as well. It's causing you higher rates of cortisol. It's dropping your immune system, and you happen to go be at your kid's college and catch something from somebody. So it's now having a real impact on your health negatively, to have known that there's a little bit of a question about a marker that you have. If we were testing on people who weren't as evolved as intellectual, we weren't testing on people, and I'm not talking about animal testing, but I mean, if people didn't know what they were being tested on or have those results, which would be unethical. See, the cycle that I'm worried about is to get population information, we're having impacts on individuals. And I think the same thing happens at work, both in terms of being studied, right? Being tracked by my company. How are my sales? And I think salespeople are an easy group to point to in this. I'm down 8% in the Northeast. And what does that mean for me and my job and my safety and my ability to send my kid to camp or whatever it is? And how does that impact my life as an individual versus how does it help the company? How does it impact my resilience? Even if it's making the whole organization more resilient, a few years down the road, we're going to know better how to place our products and how to sell them. And then when we look at the impact of being tracked, and this is the last thing I wanted to pivot to with you guys, on whom we are gathering the data, whether it is our 15-year-old and which friend's house they're at because we're tracking them geographically, or our 17-year-old who's going 67 in a 65, and now we know that, whereas thank goodness none of our parents ever knew that. Or it's this quiz on October 18th in fourth grade math was a C+ instead of the A's that I'd been getting. And I don't have the opportunity to turn that around by report card time because my parents have already gotten a notification that I got a C+ on my math quiz. And so what about the impact on resilience of people whose data is being collected? Do you see any ways to think through that as a leader to make your organization stronger by trying to make your people a little stronger?
I guess I really see it the other way around. That I think that I'm not quite answering your question about the people, but I think the source of stress is unstructured problems, or you have a problem that's so complex that it's coming at you from a million different directions. And I'll jump on Scott's example of, we're down 8% in the Northeast. When there can be innumerable causes to that question, that's your moment of stress. But if you can crystallize, and in the book I call it one of the superpowers of data, that it crystallizes complex information. If you can crystallize these questions into a metric that you can wrap your head around, and you can take maybe 200 variables and put it into one that's a metric you can track, then that's a source of de-stressing. Not distressing, but de-stressing. So because it simplifies the question, and your brain is not trying to anxiously cover more territory that it can handle. So I actually think that the crystallizing into metrics is a force of resilience.
I'll go on the corporate one real quick. I would say incentives drive behavior. And so if what you're tracking is allowing people to understand how their behavior maps to the incentive structure that is in place, I think that is net positive for a company and can drive resilience. If you are tracking them for things outside of that, it starts to feel invasive, big brotherish, and perhaps you're not building resilience. So that's the corporate side. Yeah.
Say it again. If you're tracking to what exactly?
If you're tracking, so incentives drive your employees' behavior, right?
Right.
Then if they know their incentive structure and what you are tracking, so sales is a good one. Gong is used sort of fairly ubiquitously, or versions of Gong. And what I'm doing is I am helping you get better, right? Delivering that demo or that sales conversation, asking for the order, right? My incentive is very clear as a salesperson. I'm coin operated most often, right? So if what we're tracking is helping you get better at that thing, that I think is net positive because you're driving behavior, right? That is going to help them hit their incentives. But if you're tracking,
if I'm following that backwards, if you're tracking specifically to metrics that are clearly incentivized,
yes,
that's how you can use tracking to make people more resilient and not make them feel that you are invasive. It's just clear. We want to give you your incentives. We have to have metrics, so that's what we track.
That's my version of it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
I am reminded of our time with the father-daughters, right? 2 weeks ago, Dr. G, where a father said, my daughter likes that I track her through, I think it was Life 360, because she feels comfortable. And you said to him, but are you teaching that 15-year-old resilience, right? Or are you actually incentivizing the wrong thing by making her feel comfortable when she should be figuring that out on her own? So I wanted to make that distinction. I thought that was a good one that you made 2 weeks ago.
And it's an interesting way to think about it. Anat, how do you think about it?
Yeah, I'm thinking this whole conversation, we're talking about clarity and focus, right? But the flip side of that is also restraint, whether it's me telling my CEO, we're not going to build everything our competitors have, or telling as a leader, right, telling the team, this is what we're not doing this quarter because we're focused on something else. Also to spell that out. But as a parent, the restraint to look at all the things, I have access to all the grades, I have access to the location, I have access to the text, right? Do you need to check them? Not as just me as a parent, but as an observer of other parents. Some do. Someone may have a child with ADHD and they need to make sure this kid is actually turning in their papers. And that's their role as the consultant model. Jonathan Haidt comes out with be a consultant, not just a parent. And I love that. Some need to make sure that the kid didn't ride his e-bike 6 towns over on the highway. Okay, fine. But for the most part, why are you tracking them? I right now do not have a real need in this moment to track anything. I have the access and maybe I'll need to, but right now my resilience is showing restraint, both for me and the kids. They know that I don't look right now.
And that's a really nice place for me to, you guys are helping me craft for myself a sort of equation. If I pull a through line through this entire conversation, Scott, you spoke about clarity for leadership, and Justin and you talked about, what what's the problem? What's the dilemma, as you put it, Justin, that we're trying to actually get to, so that the demand, I think I can leave. I understand why it's in your book, but I think for this equation, I can leave demand out of it because the demand is sort of implicit. So if I have the clarity as a leader to know what I'm focused on and get to the right question, if that question is actionable and the metrics are related to what we will act on, whether that's incentives or changing our product or changing what we ask of someone, or even if we're thinking at home, consequences, if I'm thinking in terms of health, further testing, surveillance, whatever it is. And then I have the restraint, and this is where I think this is the alchemy in that that makes it actual resilience. If I have the restraint to limit myself only to that clarity and those questions, and not rake in all the data that is adjacent and available because it's available. And I'm really willing to question my own desire to just know more. I must have more, I must have more. That restraint will actually allow me to use the data I get in a way that builds resilience for everybody, for the people that I'm asking of it and the people that I'm delivering it back to, and for me when I'm looking at it. And it might reduce that data overwhelm you spoke about at the very beginning. Okay, let's end, please, on a positive note. I would like to ask each of you, and Einat, I'm going to start with you. What's a way that data brings you joy?
I've been making pie charts of how I spend my allowance since the second grade, so this one's really easy. I love a visualization. And this is just to, where we are at the time in New York and in the world. But there was a great chart of the Knicks game. I don't know if it was game 4 actually or game 5, but it was points stacked up minute by minute, team by team, side by side, and it looked like the Empire State Building at the end. I loved that. It looked so good. So I really like
we're going to have to find that, try and put it in our show notes. Will you send it? That's amazing.
So things like that bring me joy when you can really also just see the result of the action.
And in that way, it must have seemed meant somehow that it created the Empire State Building.
I loved it.
All right, Scott, to you. What's a way that data brings you joy?
I'd say like in my board and my advisory roles, when I've worked with a CEO to surface sort of the right data and watch that leadership team go from confusion to clarity, and watch that take action, it's super satisfying. So I love that part of what I do.
The way you describe it, it feels like, and this is an old idea, this is an old image, but watching film develop, right? That it takes on that clarity when you wash it correctly, put it through the right filters, and it starts to become really vibrant and really obvious. Justin, how about you?
For me, the joy is in the creative act of taking a problem that seems way too soft to be turned into a metric or data and turning it into something that is hard and, as you say, actionable. Adam Green is an entrepreneur that I profiled in the book whose father died of dementia, but he thinks that his father really died because he was lonely, and that accelerated the dementia. And so Adam Green he started a startup called Klatch that was designed to score seniors in senior homes about how lonely they were and therefore what treatments they needed. And to have made that leap, that I have a problem as obscure and complex and human as loneliness, but I can put a number on it that helps me take action. That's a beautiful passage.
I love that. And I'll add my own, which is we keep a board at my office. I work at a family health center, a federally qualified health center, and we have school pictures, newborn pictures, because we help deliver babies in the hospital and take care of newborns, and people bring in their school pictures. And it started a path where people will bring us their sober coin. If they've been sober for 12 years and they feel like that's part of their health journey, they'll get an extra coin and bring it into us. And we get all kinds of different mementos and representations. I had somebody bring me a seashell from a trip that they were able to take after a stroke. And another patient saw that and brought me something from a trip that she took because she said, because I didn't have a stroke, because you talked me into that blood pressure medicine. And that sort of data of people's lives continuing and finding joy and hitting milestones, for me, that really brings me joy. Thank you, all three of you, for bringing today such open minds and creative solutions to a problem that is going to grow and grow for all of us, and that can help us solve so many important questions that are coming our way. It is the beginning of our summer break on the Think Tank. We'll be back the fourth Tuesday in September, and I'm really interested to know what topics you would like us to cover in the next season. So please email me. I'll be back in your inbox in August to tell you what we're doing next. Have a really good summer.